Sorrel Narth was declared never born while standing alive before the Dragon King. Birth could be erased by ink. Living witness names were harder to burn. The sentence did not come with chains. Chains belonged to criminals and enemies whose names still held standing. Sorrel received something colder, a blank line. High Ledger Warden Calvin Moore dragged one gloved finger across the Royal Dragon Ledger, and the ink where her name had lived for 23 years began to smoke. Cindervault Ledger Hall watched in silence, brightened by fire. Servants stood along the outer pillars with their eyes lowered, each one understanding the punishment too well to look at it directly. Nobles gathered around the central brazier, dragon bone masks gleaming red. Above them, Dragon King Tharion Mavrek sat on an obsidian dais, with his black wings folded behind the throne like two pieces of night sharpened into law. Calvin read the decree in a voice smooth enough to sound merciful. Under Ash Name Law, Sorrel Narth is removed from the Royal Servant Registry, Birth Ledger, Labor Ledger, Ration Ledger, and Witness Ledger. No debt may be claimed in her name. No injury may be answered in her name. No testimony may be received in her name. Sorrel stood on the ash-stained floor in a plain gray servant dress, hands bound with white ledger cord, throat dry from 3 days of questioning. She had not stolen royal grain or forged a ration seal. She had found 3 missing servant names burned beneath the kitchen ledger and asked why the dead were still drawing work assignments. That had been enough. Calvin turned one page. The court recognizes no legal birth under the name Sorrel Narth. A noblewoman whispered, "Then who is she?" Calvin smiled without looking at Sorrel. No one. The word entered like weather. No one could be beaten without record. No one could be starved without ration loss. No one could be buried without a burial line. If Sorrel walked from the hall, a guard could cut her down, and Dragon Law would recognize more damage in the blood-stained floor than in her body. She looked toward Tharion, not for mercy. The Dragon King had built his reign on clean decrees, public obedience, and fire that did not hesitate. His black hair touched his shoulders. His gold eyes were narrowed. His face beautiful in the cold way blades were beautiful. He had not watched Sorrel when Calvin began reading. Now he did. "Why was this servant brought before me?" Tharion asked. Calvin bowed. "She attempted to restore names removed by palace authority." Sorrel's bound hands tightened. They were not removed. They were hidden under ash. The ledger cord cut deeper. "The accused has no recognized name from which to answer," Calvin said. "I am answering from my mouth." Several servants lifted their heads by a fraction. Tharion noticed. So did Calvin. The ledger warden stepped toward the brazier. "Majesty, nameless speech contaminates witness law. The page must be cleansed by royal fire." Tharion's gaze remained on Sorrel. "Did you enter the lower ledger vault?" "Yes." "Did you touch sealed ash pages?" "Yes." "Did you read names burned out of the law?" Sorrel swallowed. "I read what the ash kept." Calvin's eyes sharpened. "Forbidden restoration language." Tharion rose. His wings unfolded behind him. Black membranes stretched wide from his back, vast and scarred, edged with ember-red veins. Sorrel had seen them only once before, while cleaning after his coronation. Even then, they had looked less like royal power than something forced to carry too much night. Tharion descended the dais and stopped before the Royal Dragon Ledger. "Speak the name," he said. Calvin blinked. "Majesty?" The one being removed. Fear crossed the ledger warden's face for only a breath. "Sorrel Narth." The ink hissed. Tharion raised his bare hand above the page. White gold dragonfire gathered in his palm, the fire used for final law. Once it touched the ledger, Sorrel would not be dead. Death required recognition. She would be less than dead. Sorrel lifted her chin. "My name is Sorrel Narth." "The court does not receive it," Calvin snapped. Tharion's fire fell. The page burned. Royal fire did not only destroy, it received what the ledger could not lawfully swallow. Sorrel expected the last mark of her life to vanish. Instead, the ash rose. It gathered in a thin black coil above the ledger, circled Tharion's wrist, then slid toward the wings spread behind him. The Dragon King went still. Ash struck black membrane. Letters burned across his left wing in silver-white fire. Not a title, not a sentence, a name. Sorrel Narth. Sorrel stared at her own name written across the Dragon King's wing, bright enough to illuminate every noble mask, every servant face, and every seal Calvin had used to make her invisible. Not a mark of favor, a receipt, and receipts were harder to deny than mercy. Tharion turned his head slowly toward his wing. His expression lost its cold certainty. Calvin whispered, "That is impossible." The ash answered by burning deeper. It was not choosing her. It was refusing to let royal fire pretend it had destroyed a living witness name. Sorrel Narth. The name the ledger had rejected had not vanished. It had transferred to the firebearer who tried to erase it. The wing had not chosen her. The fire had kept what the ledger could not lawfully consume. Her name had risen through the king's own fire and written itself across the place his court could not look away from. But the wing had not yet named why royal fire received her name instead of ash. The royal dragon ledger had rejected Sorrel's birth, but Tharion's wing had received the name his fire failed to destroy. Silver-white letters remained across the black membrane, bright enough to expose every tremor in Cindervault ledger hall. Sorrel stood beneath them with white ledger cord still cutting into her wrists. Her birth had not been restored. Her ration line remained empty. Her testimony still held no legal standing. A name written on royal flesh did not yet make her a person under Ash name law. It made her a problem the court could no longer hide inside a blank line. Tharion kept his left wing open behind him. Sorrel's name burned along the scarred membrane without warmth, protection, or tenderness. The letters did not reach toward her. They did not loosen her bindings. They remained exactly what the ash had made them. A receipt. Calvin Mord recovered first. He stepped between Sorrel and the royal dragon ledger, his dark gloves held carefully away from the burned page. Wing fire impressions cannot be tried through a nameless servant's speech. Sorrel looked past him at the letters. "Read why my name rose to his wing." Calvin's mouth tightened. "Nameless speech cannot command a royal wing. I am not commanding it." Her wrists burned as she lifted her bound hand slightly. The record is already there. Several nobles shifted behind their dragon-bone masks. They did not believe her. Belief would require admitting that a legal erasure had failed under the king's own fire. But they had seen the ash rise. They had seen Sorrel Narth written where no servant hand could have reached. Tharion turned toward Calvin. His expression had regained its cold control, but one gold eye remained fixed on the name across his wing. "Can royal flesh carry a legal record?" he asked. Calvin bowed. "Royal wings carry conquest seals, blood decrees, and succession flame. They do not receive servant names. This is contamination caused by forbidden ash contact." Sorrel's throat tightened. "Then let the contamination name itself." Calvin moved toward the ledger. "The page must be closed." Tharion's voice stopped him. "No, only that. Not rescue. Not restoration. A command keeping the evidence open." Sorrel felt the difference. He did not cut the ledger cord from her wrists. Not yet. If he freed her before the wing read, Calvin would call the mark royal favor instead of record. So Sorrel remained bound while the king preserved the very procedure that had nearly erased her. The fire had been his. The decree had been his. A warden's glove did not make the king's flame innocent. The letters on Tharion's wing pulsed once. Ash lifted from the burned ledger and stretched between page and membrane like a black thread pulled tight. The central brazier bent toward it. White gold flame moved along the thread, and 4 lines appeared in the air. Living witness name entered. Ledger erasure attempted. Royal fire received. Wing debt opened. The wing had named the first debt. It had not yet named the debt still working under the kitchen ash. The last line burned deeper than the others. Wing debt opened. Sorrel stared at it. She had expected some proof that Calvin's decree was false. She had not expected the king's body to become the place where the law recorded what it failed to destroy. The record opened inside the flame. Sorrel saw herself in the lower kitchen vault 3 nights earlier, kneeling beside a ledger blackened by years of grease and smoke. 3 servant names lay beneath the ash, cut from the visible pages but still tied to work assignments. She had traced 1 letter with the edge of a cleaning cloth. The ash had shifted toward her touch. Living witness name entered. The image changed. Calvin stood in the high registry chamber, transferring Sorrel's name from the witness ledger to the erasure page. His glove pressed the ash name seal into the margin. Ledger erasure attempted. Then Tharion's white gold fire struck the page again. The flame did not consume Sorrel's name. It took it. Royal fire received. The burning name crossed from ledger to fire, from fire to the black wing bearing the king's legal flame. The membrane darkened around it, and a thin silver line opened beneath the letters like the first cut of an unpaid account. Wing debt opened. Calvin lifted his chin. Ash name law does not answer to marks on royal flesh. Sorrel looked directly at him. You did not make me no one. You moved my name where the court could not pretend it had vanished. And mine was not the only name the ash kept. The silver line beneath her name widened. Tharion flinched. Only slightly, but Sorrel saw it. The record had pain in it, not romantic pain, not destiny. Debt. Tharion looked from the ledger to the wing spreading behind him. If my fire received what my ledger erased, then my law has been wearing the names it claimed were gone. The sentence struck the hall with more force than anger. Calvin stepped forward. Majesty, one unstable impression cannot accuse ash name law. The servant entered forbidden ash pages before her erasure. Her contamination may have attached itself to royal fire. Sorrel's gaze moved to the burned kitchen record still visible inside the flame. The 3 missing names still waited under the kitchen ash, but Sorrel's name had opened the first debt. Calvin reached toward the ledger clasp. Kitchen ash cannot accuse the royal dragon ledger. The black thread between page and wing began to tighten. The 4 lines trembled. Sorrel felt the cord at her wrists pull, as if the law wanted her body held still while it closed over her name again. Tharion did not touch her. He spread his wing farther instead, forcing the silver letters into full view. The first debt remained open, but below it, 3 dead servant names still carried living work. Sorrel's name had not appeared on Tharion's wing because the fire favored her. The royal dragon ledger had attempted to erase a living witness name, and the king's own white gold flame received what the page could not destroy, opening a wing debt his court had hidden beneath ash name law. But the kitchen ash still held 3 names the law had killed while their labor remained useful. The wing debt had opened Sorrel's name, but the kitchen ash still held 3 servant names. The ledger had buried while their work remained assigned. Sorrel stood before the royal dragon ledger with white cord still cutting into her wrists. Her birth remained erased. Her labor line was empty. Her voice still had no legal standing beneath ash name law. Across Tharion Mavrek's black wing, her name burned in silver-white fire. It did not warm her. It did not protect her. It remained a receipt for what his fire had failed to destroy. Below the letters, the thin line of wing debt pulsed once. Ash lifted from the ledger and drifted toward the lower hall, not scattering but pulling into a narrow trail that smelled of grease, burned grain, and old kitchen smoke. Sorrel knew where it led. Read the names under the kitchen ash. Calvin Mord stepped before the ledger clasp. Dead name labor records cannot be tried through a nameless servant's forbidden restoration. Sorrel looked at the dark gloves that had erased her. Then the name should have nothing left to read. Calvin's expression hardened. Kitchen ledger's record work, not legal existence. That is the lie. The ledger cord tightened around Sorrel's wrists as if the law itself had heard insolence. Tharion watched the ash trail gather at the foot of his dais. His wing remained open, forcing Sorrel's name into public view, but he did not cut her bindings. Not yet. If he restored her before the record finished, Calvin would call every answer after it royal interference. So Sorrel remained legally no one, while the king's body carried proof that she had existed. The fire had been his. The decree had been his. The ledger bore his crest. Whatever waited beneath the kitchen ash could not become Calvin's crime alone simply because the warden's hand had written it. Tharion's voice crossed the hall. Open the kitchen account. Calvin bowed without obedience. Majesty, dead name labor is an administrative continuation. It cannot accuse the crown. Then let administration speak. The ash trail rose. It spread above the burned ledger in 3 separate columns. No bodies appeared. No spirits climbed from the floor. Only 3 names formed from kitchen soot. Edrispel, Nomavar, Tovinsay. Sorrel had seen those names hidden beneath the grease-black page. She had also seen their work marks continuing below them for months after their birth and witness lines had been burned away. 4 records opened in white gold flame. Dead name ledger entered. Work assignments maintained. Ration lines diverted. Injury claims erased. The ash had named the stolen labor. It had not yet named where the diverted rations went. The wing had opened 3 accounts. Only 3. The rest of the ash remained silent. Sorrel stared at the names. Edris Pell had sharpened carving knives in the lower kitchens. Noma Var had carried coal to the eastern ovens. Tovin Say had cleaned dragon fat from feast trays until the lye split the skin of his hands. Sorrel had worked beside all 3. Then one morning, they had stopped appearing. The kitchen overseer said they had been transferred. The ledger said they had never been born. Yet their labor marks continued. The record opened inside the flame. Edris's name vanished from the servant birth roll, but the knife-sharpening assignment remained active. Each dawn, another unnamed kitchen hand completed the work under his erased line. Noma's ration entry closed, but grain continued leaving the stores beneath her number. The food did not go to her. It passed into a private warden account marked loss recovery. Tovin's injury claim showed burns across both palms. The claim was denied on the same day his witness name was removed. After that, the kitchen continued assigning work beneath his line without recognizing the injured body that had once performed it. Work assignments maintained. Ration lines diverted. Injury claims erased. Sorrel's stomach tightened. "You did not erase them because they were gone," she said. "You erased them so their work could remain without their bodies counting. And you fed your accounts with what their bodies were no longer allowed to claim." Calvin did not look at the names. Labor assignments belong to the palace. A servant's removal does not invalidate necessary work. The work remained in their names. Administrative names. They were people before you needed them to become numbers. A small movement passed through the servants along the pillars. Not belief. Recognition. Many of them had completed tasks beneath names belonging to people who no longer appeared at meals. Tharion read the ration record again. His gold eyes narrowed. The diverted lines entered warden recovery accounts. Recovery was the word Calvin used when the court stole from people it had already made impossible to repay. Calvin bowed. Unused rations returned to lawful administration. Unused because the people assigned to receive them were erased. The ledger recognized no recipients. Sorrel looked at Tharion. "Because your law removed them first." The sentence reached him cleanly. He did not turn away. "If erased names still carried labor under my ledger," Tharion said, "then my court did not only remove people, it kept using them after law made them no one." The 3 ash columns flared. Calvin moved toward the kitchen account. Kitchen ash cannot accuse the Royal Dragon ledger. He pressed his gloved hand against the page. The names began to darken. Sorrel pulled against the cord, pain cutting across her wrists. "Read," before he turned stolen labor into administration. The winged debt beneath her name widened. Tharion's black membrane shuddered, but he held it open. He did not save Sorrel from the cord. He kept the account visible. The ash did not raise every erased servant at once. It opened the first 3 accounts and held them above the court long enough for each theft to remain legible. The next account waited inside the warden recovery mark. Edris Pell, Noma Var, Tovin Say. The 3 missing servants had not vanished from royal labor. Their names had been burned from birth and witness ledgers. But their work assignments remained active, their ration lines diverted, and their injury claims erased so Cindervault could keep using bodies the law no longer had to count. But the ration lines had not yet named the account that received them. The kitchen ash had opened 3 dead name accounts, but the diverted ration lines still had not named who received what the erased servants were denied. Sorrel remained before the Royal Dragon ledger, with white cord cutting into her wrists. Her birth had not returned. Her witness line remained blank. Across Tharion Mavrek's open black wing, her name still burned in silver-white fire, and beneath it the first wing debt pulsed like an unpaid wound. The mark did not protect her. It did not loosen the cord. It only kept the account from disappearing. Above the ledger, the names Edris Pell, Noma Var, and Tovin Say hung in 3 columns of kitchen ash. Their work assignments still burned beneath them. Their ration lines stretched away from the names in thin white gold threads, each thread passing through the Royal Dragon ledger before vanishing beneath Calvin Mord's gloved hand. Sorrel watched the lines pull toward the dark warden mark stamped into the page. "Read the warden recovery account." Calvin did not look at her. "Recovery accounts cannot be tried through dead name kitchen ash." The rations entered your mark. Unused provisions returned to lawful administration. They were called unused after you erased the people owed. The servants along the pillars stayed silent, but Sorrel saw their attention shift toward the ration threads. Every palace servant understood hunger measured by ink. A missing meal was not merely an empty bowl. It was a record claiming the body had no right to be fed. Tharion's gold eyes followed the threads into Calvin's mark. His wing remained spread, Sorrel's name visible to the entire court. He had still not ordered the cord removed. His hand moved toward it once, then stopped. If he restored Sorrel before the recovery account opened, Calvin would make mercy look like contamination. Sorrel felt the restraint and refused to mistake it for kindness. The cord remained because the king's law had placed it there. Keeping evidence open did not erase the fact that she was still legally no one. Tharion looked at Calvin. "Open the recovery account." Calvin bowed. "Majesty, administrative recovery protects the palace from waste created by closed servant lines." "You call them closed," Sorrel said, "because erased sounds too much like what you did." The wingdet widened. Ash slipped from the three names and followed the ration threads into the warden mark. The dark seal resisted, tightening around the lines as if trying to swallow them before the court could see where they ended. Then Tharion's white gold fire touched the wingdet. The ledger answered. 4 records opened in the air. Warden recovery account entered. Dead rations received. Injury coin withheld. Ash name surplus converted. The hall went still. Sorrel stared at the second line. Dead rations. Food owed to people the law had declared never born. The record opened inside the flame. Noma Var's ration line appeared first. Her grain allowance continued for 63 days after her birth record was burned. Each week, the amount left the royal stores and entered the warden recovery account. None reached the lower kitchens. None reached another servant under Noma's work assignment. The grain was sold back to palace merchants as recovered surplus. Dead rations received. Tovinsay's injury claim opened next. Coin had been assigned for the burns across his palms, enough to purchase salve and 2 weeks away from the dragon fat trays. On the day his witness name was erased, the injury coin moved into Calvin's account under administrative closure. Injury coin withheld. Edris Pell's line followed. His knife-sharpening wages remained active, but because no legal person stood beneath the name, the unpaid coin accumulated as Ash name surplus. Every month, the account converted the missing wages into warden recovery value. Ash name surplus converted. No spirits rose. No lost servants returned. Only coin, grain, work, and wounds remained, each one proving the court had profited from people it refused to recognize. Sorrel looked at Calvin. "You did not recover loss. You created loss by erasing the people owed." Calvin's expression stayed smooth. "Administrative value belongs to the crown when no legal claimant remains. You removed the claimants. Ash, name law, removed unlawful lines. And then your account ate what those lines were owed." The warden mark burned darker. Tharion read the records again. His face had gone still in the way it did when anger became more dangerous than display. "If my court fed recovery accounts with rations owed to erased servants," he said, "then Ash name law did not only remove names, it turned their hunger into profit." The 3 ration threads flared. Calvin turned toward the king. "Majesty, the accounts bear my office because the ledger warden is responsible for clothesline recovery. That does not make lawful conversion theft." "The accounts bear your mark," Sorrel said, "but they exist beneath his law." Her gaze moved to Tharion. "The ledger carried your crest. The fire carried your decree. Stolen food and injury coin did not become Calvin's crime alone because his glove collected them." Tharion did not defend himself. That silence was not absolution. It was the first time the court had seen him refuse it. Calvin pressed his palm over the warden mark. Administrative recovery cannot be accused by a servant whose birth is unrecognized. The ration threads began to collapse. Noma's grain line dimmed. Tovin's injury coin folded back into ash. Edris's wages disappeared beneath the seal. Sorrel pulled against the cord until it cut her skin. "Read before he turns their hunger into lawful surplus again." The wing debt burned through Tharion's black membrane. He did not close the wing. He held the painful receipt open while his own ledger resisted him. The account gave one final reading. The diverted ration lines had not returned to lawful administration. Calvin's warden recovery account had received dead rations, withheld injury coin, and converted erased servant hunger into ash-name surplus beneath a ledger that carried Tharion's crest. The warden account had named the profit, but Tharion's black wing still had not named what that profit maintained. Sorrel saw the answer hiding beneath the silver line of debt. Her name remained bright across the membrane, but the skin around it was unnaturally dark, darker even than the rest of the wing. Not shadow, not natural scale. A layered black seal stretched from bone to edge, polished smooth enough to make every scar look royal and every hidden mark disappear. The 3 ration threads had vanished beneath Calvin's palm, yet faint gold residue still clung to the wing debt. Grain, injury coin, unpaid wages. All of it had become value before the royal dragon ledger swallowed the trail. Value had to feed something. Sorrel remained bound before the page, blood beginning to darken the white cord around her wrists. Her berth had not been restored. The court still had no legal duty to hear her voice. Tharion's wing carried her name, but the receipt did not make him her protector. It made him part of the account. She looked at the dark seal covering the membrane. Read what the ash-name surplus maintained. Calvin's gloved hand lifted from the recovery mark. Royal wing accounts cannot be tried through dead-name kitchen residue. Sorrel met his gaze. Then the surplus should not lead there. It leads to crown maintenance. All recovered value does. Maintenance of what? Calvin turned toward Tharion rather than answer her. Majesty, wing seal rights are private instruments of sovereignty. They cannot be opened before servants. Sorrel almost smiled. There it was. Not denial. Procedure. Tharion's gold eyes moved along his own wing. Open the maintenance line. Calvin bowed, but his expression tightened. The seal protects royal authority. Then it should survive being read. Ash lifted from the warden recovery mark and crossed the air in 3 thin streams. One carried the dull gold of ration grain. One carried the pale shine of injury coin. One carried the blackened residue of unpaid wages. All 3 touched Tharion's wing. The membrane shuddered. Sorrel's name burned brighter. 4 records appeared beneath it. Ash name surplus transferred. Royal wing seal renewed. Erase name residue bound. Visible debt suppressed. The court changed around the words. No one stepped back. That would have admitted fear. But every dragon bone mask turned toward the king's wings. The record opened. A private chamber appeared inside white gold fire. Tharion stood at its center years earlier, wings spread while ledger wardens painted black seal resin across the membranes. Calvin was younger in the record, his gloves clean, his face solemn with ceremonial duty. The seal prevents conquered names from staining royal fire, he said. Tharion's younger voice answered, Names cannot stain fire. Unclosed debts can. Calvin pressed a heated ledger stamp against the wing. The black seal spread. Sorrel felt the words lodge beneath her ribs. Unclosed debts. The vision shifted through years of ceremonies. Each time the ash-name accounts gathered enough surplus, another layer of black resin was painted over Tharion's wings. Grain taken from erased servants. Injury coin withheld from bodies the law refused to recognize. Wages earned beneath dead names. Royal wing seal renewed. Beneath each layer, faint letters moved. Not spirits. Not voices. Residue. Names received by royal fire when birth lines were burned, pressed into the wing and covered before the court could see them. Erased name residue bound. Visible debt suppressed. Sorrel stared at the black membrane behind her own burning name. For the first time, she saw shapes beneath it. Not readable names, not yet, but narrow ridges where letters had been sealed under layer after layer of polished darkness. Her name was not the first the fire had received. It was the first the seal had failed to hide. Calvin spoke before the thought could settle through the hall. Royal fire collects residue from every final decree. The wing seal prevents legal contamination. It does not preserve names. Sorrel looked at the moving ridges under the black seal. Then why does the seal need stolen wages to keep them invisible? The maintenance source does not alter the right's legality. You erased servants, took what they were owed, and used the profit to cover the proof that your fire kept them. Calvin's mouth hardened. The fire belongs to the crown. Sorrel turned toward Tharion. And so does the wing. The words reached him without mercy. The ledger bore his crest. The decree used his fire. The seal covered his body. Calvin had administered the system, but Tharion had worn its polished result before the court and called the darkness natural. His gaze followed the hidden ridges beneath the membrane. How long, he asked. Calvin hesitated. Not long enough to become confession. Long enough to become record. Wing seals have been renewed under Ashname law for 3 reigns. Tharion's face went still. During mine. Yes, Majesty. With recovery surplus. With lawful crown value. Sorrel's voice cut through the phrase. Value made from hunger. The silver debt line spread farther across Tharion's wing. Pain moved through his face before control buried it. His hand shifted toward Sorrel's cord, then stopped. If he freed her now, Calvin would name the opening of the wing account an act of royal attachment. Sorrel hated the logic because it left the cord biting her skin. She also understood that the court was waiting for mercy. It could dismiss more easily than evidence. So Tharion kept his hand at his side and kept his wing open. If Ashname surplus renewed the seal that covered what my fire received, he said, then my court used erased servant hunger to hide erased servant names on my own body. Calvin stepped toward the ledger clasp. Visible wing residue threatens succession law. The account must close. His glove struck the maintenance mark. The black seal across Tharion's wing tightened. Sorrel's name flickered. Beneath it, the hidden ridges began to flatten. She pulled against the cord. Read before he makes the seal look like skin again. The wing debt flared. The record held one final image. Dead rations, withheld injury coin, and unpaid wages converted into black wing, seal resin, renewed across Tharion's wings to bind the residue of names his royal fire had received and keep every debt invisible beneath polished royal darkness. The Warden recovery account had not fed administration alone. It had paid for the seal across the Dragon King's wings, the seal that made erased names look like nothing more than black skin. The black wing seal had hidden erased name residue for years, but it had not yet explained why Sorrel's name was the first one it failed to bury. The silver letters still burned across Tharion Mavrek's left wing while the polished darkness around them tightened like a second skin. Beneath the seal, narrow ridges shifted where other names had been pressed flat by royal law. None rose, none spoke. The wing held them as unpaid accounts, not ghosts. Sorrel remained bound before the ledger. Blood had reached the ends of the white cord around her wrists, staining the fibers red where they crossed her pulse. Her birthline was still blank. Her witness standing still did not exist. The court could see her name on the Dragon King's wing and still claim the woman beneath it had no legal voice. Calvin Mord watched the burning letters with controlled disgust. The visible mark is an instability in the wing seal, nothing more. Sorrel looked at the black resin surrounding her name. Then read why mine remained visible. Calvin's gloved fingers tightened near the ledger clasp. Seal failure records cannot be tried through a servant already contaminated by forbidden ash. Tharion's wing flexed once. Pain crossed his face and vanished. Sorrel saw it. The seal was trying to close over her name again. Tharion did not fold the wing. Open the failure line, he said. Calvin bowed with the careful resistance of a man who knew law could delay obedience without openly refusing it. Majesty, a royal seal protects succession fire. If the membrane is forced to read beyond safe depth, every conquest decree carried by your wings may become unstable. Tharion's gold eyes narrowed. You have already shown me that stability was purchased with stolen hunger. Sorrel felt something shift between them. Not trust. Not tenderness. Recognition sharpened by shared danger. She lifted her bound hands toward the burning name. Read what the seal could not flatten. The ash moved. Not toward Sorrel. Toward the letters across Tharion's wing. White gold fire gathered at the edge of the name and pressed downward through the black resin. The seal resisted. For one breath, the membrane looked solid again. Then 4 lines opened beneath Sorrel Narth. Living witness contact entered. Ash name memory retained. Seal suppression resisted. Witness standing activated. The final line struck the ledger cord around Sorrel's wrists. The cord tightened so violently she dropped to one knee. Tharion moved. Only half a step, then stopped. If he touched the bindings now, Calvin would call the record shaped by royal interference. Sorrel saw the decision cut through him and hated that proof still required her pain to remain untouched. She forced herself upright. "Witness standing," Tharion read. Calvin answered quickly. "A temporary fire response. It does not restore legal birth." Sorrel looked at the first line. "Living witness contact." The record opened. The lower kitchen vault appeared inside the white gold flame. Sorrel knelt beside the grease-dark ledger, tracing the first buried name beneath the ash. She had not spoken magic. She had not offered blood. She had simply recognized Edris Pell's name and remembered the man attached to it. The ash had moved because someone living still knew who the erased letters belonged to. Ash name memory retained. The image shifted to Nomavar's ration line. Sorrel remembered the way Noma always broke her bread in equal pieces before eating. Tovinsay's injury mark appeared next. Sorrel remembered wrapping his burned palms after the overseer refused him salve. Each memory struck the ash like a witness seal. Not royal blood, not prophecy, recognition. The record moved to Sorrel's own erasure. When Calvin burned her name, the ledger expected silence. But Sorrel had entered the erasure already, carrying 3 dead name memories. Her living name had become attached to the accounts she refused to forget. Tharion's fire tried to destroy the page. The ash recognized a witness instead. Seal suppression resisted. The wing received the name because royal fire had encountered something the ledger could not lawfully consume. A living person who still carried proof that erased names had belonged to real bodies. Witness standing activated. Sorrel stared at the words. "My name remained because I remembered theirs." Calvin's voice hardened. "Memory is not standing." "No," Sorrel said. "But your law made it evidence when it tried to burn the witness holding it." The servants along the pillars watched without lifting their faces fully. Sorrel could feel their attention like warmth under a closed door. Tharion looked at the black seal covering his wing. Then she did not contaminate the fire. Calvin did not answer. Tharion's voice lowered. She exposed what it had already received. The silver letters brightened. Sorrel held his gaze. "Your wing did not choose me." End of sections. End of section. "No," he said. The answer came without hesitation. It recorded the debt. That mattered more than comfort would have. Calvin moved toward the ledger. "Witness standing cannot be granted to a person whose birth remains unrecognized." Sorrel turned to him. "Then your law has made a witness it refuses to admit exists. The contradiction requires closure. It requires correction." Calvin struck the page with his seal. The 4 lines began to darken. The black resin pulled over Sorrel's name from both sides. Beneath it, one hidden ridge rose slightly, only one forming the first letter of a servant name the wing had carried longer than hers. Sorrel saw it before the seal flattened it again. An E. Edri. The first missing servant had not remained only in the kitchen ledger. His erased name had reached Tharion's fire and been sealed across the king's wing years before Sorrel ever touched the ash. Tharion saw the letter too. His face went still. Sorrel pulled against the cord. "Do not close the first witness account." Calvin pressed harder. "A nameless servant cannot command succession fire." "She is no longer nameless," Tharion said. The hall changed around the words. He still did not free her. He did not restore her birth. But he forced his wing wider, and the black seal cracked along the hidden ridge beneath Sorrel's name. The record held one final truth. Sorrel's name had remained visible because she carried living memory of servants the ledger erased. Royal Fire had recognized that memory as witness contact, resisted the wing seal, and opened legal standing the ash name law had tried to deny. Sorrel was not a hidden queen, a chosen bride, or a dragon blood heir. She was an ash name witness. And beneath her name, the first sealed servant account had begun to rise. The first hidden ridge beneath Sorrel's name did not rise into a body. It opened into an account. A single silver letter pushed through the black seal on Tharion Mavrek's wing, narrow and bright against the polished membrane. Oh. Sorrel knew the name before the rest appeared. Edris Pell, the knife sharpener from the lower kitchens. The man whose work line had continued after the Royal Dragon Ledger declared he had never existed. The man who had wrapped a strip of flour cloth around Sorrel's thumb when she cut it on a feast blade and told her that palace steel always demanded blood from hands too poor to own it. His name had been hidden beneath the Dragon King's wing for years. Sorrel stood before the ledger with her wrists still bound. Her witness standing had opened, but her birth line remained blank. Calvin could no longer call her speech entirely nameless, yet the white cord still marked her as a servant under erasure judgment. Across the hall, the first letter of Edris's name trembled beneath Sorrel's burning receipt. Calvin Mord stepped toward the wing. Sealed royal residue cannot be tried through newly activated witness standing. Sorrel looked at him. Then it should not carry a servant's first letter. It carries damaged fire. It carries Edris Pell. The name made several kitchen servants lower their faces more quickly. Not disbelief, fear of being seen, remembering. Tharion's gold eyes followed the silver ridge along his own membrane. His expression remained controlled, but the wing had begun to shake under the pressure of the seal. "Read the first name beneath mine," Sorrel said. Calvin's voice hardened. "A servant witness cannot command a royal debt surface." "She is not commanding it," Tharion said. The hall stilled. He did not look at Sorrel when he spoke. He looked at the letter cutting through the black resin. "The account is already opening." Sorrel felt the words land between them. Not protection, not devotion, recognition of evidence. Tharion still did not remove the cord from her wrists. If he restored her now, Calvin would claim that the wing responded to royal favor rather than record. Sorrel understood the calculation and hated that the proof still required her to remain bound. The black seal cracked. Ash slipped from the ledger and crossed the hall in a thin line. It touched the silver E, and 4 records opened beneath it. Servant injury entered. Witness claim denied. Birth line burned. Royal fire received. The court did not move. Sorrel stared at the first record. Servant injury entered. The white gold flame opened into memory. Edris stood in the lower kitchen passage, with blood running from his left forearm. A carving blade had shattered near the dragon-fat furnace, sending a silver fragment through his flesh. Sorrel remembered that day. She had seen the bandage. She had heard the overseer tell him to finish the royal knives before seeking salve. But the record showed more. The blade had not broken from misuse. Its metal had softened under furnace heat that should never have reached the sharpening station. Edris had filed an injury claim and named the failed heat barrier in the kitchen wall. Witness claim denied. Calvin appeared in the record beside a junior ledger clerk. "The barrier served royal efficiency," he said. "Recognition of fault would attach liability to the crown kitchen." The clerk pointed to Edris's bleeding arm. "The injury is already witnessed." "Then remove the witness standing." Birth line burned. The image shifted to Cindervault Ledger Hall years earlier. Tharion stood before the same ledger, younger but already crowned, his wings held open behind him. Calvin placed the erasure page beneath the king's hand and named Edris not as an injured servant, but as a false claimant who had damaged palace property. Tharion's white gold fire fell. Sorrel looked at him. He had burned the decree. His face changed by almost nothing, but his wing tightened hard enough to make the silver letter deepen. The record continued. Edris's name rose from the page as ash. It crossed Tharion's wrist, entered the fire-bearing wing, and vanished beneath black seal resin before the court could see it. Royal fire received. Sorrel's throat tightened. "You burned him for reporting the wall that injured him." Calvin answered before Tharion could. "The claimant damaged royal equipment and attempted to transfer responsibility to the crown. The blade broke because the heat barrier failed, according to a dead name record. According to the injury, your law erased." Calvin's mouth thinned. An erased claimant cannot maintain an accusation. Sorrel looked toward Tharion. "Because your fire made sure there was no claimant left." The sentence crossed the hall without mercy. Tharion did not deny it. He looked into the memory of his younger hand above the page. Calvin presented him as a saboteur. "And you burned the name," Sorrel said. The wingdet flared. The fire had been Tharion's. The decree had carried his authority. Calvin's false filing did not make the king's flame innocent. It made the lie lawful enough to burn. Tharion's voice came quieter. "I did. No apology. Not yet. Only admission." It was more dangerous than defense. Calvin pressed his gloved palm toward the ledger. Historical injury accounts cannot reopen final royal decrees. The silver records began to fold inward. Edris's first letter dimmed. Sorrel pulled against the cord until fresh blood warmed her wrists. "Read before he calls an injured man a damaged blade." Tharion moved his wing farther from Calvin's hand. The seal tore another inch. The full name appeared beneath Sorrel's. Edris Pell. No ghost rose. No dead servant returned. His name simply became legible on the royal wing that had carried it in darkness. The first sealed account showed that Edris Pell had not been erased because he ceased to exist. He was erased after reporting a royal kitchen failure that injured him. His witness claim was burned under Tharion's decree, and the king's own fire received his name before Calvin's seal hid it beneath the wing. But Edris's account had opened only one buried decree. 2 more kitchen names still waited beneath the black seal. Edris Pell's name remained visible beneath Sorrel's, while a second ridge began pressing against the black seal. This one did not rise near the wing bone where injury decrees had gathered. It moved lower, close to the membrane's ember-veined edge, where ration law was branded into royal fire. Sorrel knew which account waited there. Noma Var. The woman who had carried coal to the eastern ovens, divided every piece of bread before eating, and vanished after questioning why her ration number fed more mouths on paper than the kitchens ever saw. The silver ridge pushed upward. Calvin Mord moved before the first letter could form. One reopened decree does not authorize a second, he said. The witness has exceeded the account named by the wing. Sorrel stood with blood darkening the cord around her wrists. Her knees trembled from hours before the ledger, but she kept her eyes on the moving seal. The wing is not asking permission. It is reacting to contamination. The same contamination that named an injury you buried? Calvin's expression remained smooth, but his gloved hand drifted toward the ledger clasp. Tharion saw it. Do not close the page. Calvin bowed. Majesty, continued exposure risks, splitting the legal seal across both wings. Tharion's black membrane shuddered behind him. Edris's name burned beneath Sorrel's, the edges of each letter bright enough to reveal thin fractures spreading through the polished resin. The pain showed in the rigid line of his shoulders. He did not fold the wing. Sorrel did not thank him. The king had burned Edris's decree. The law splitting across his flesh was not sacrifice offered to her. It was debt returning to the body that had carried it. She looked at the second ridge. Read Noma Var. The name struck the ash. White gold fire moved beneath the seal, and the ridge opened into 4 lines. Ration discrepancy entered. Storehouse witness filed. Birth line removed. Surplus account fed. The servants along the pillars shifted again. Rations were understood by every hungry body in Cindervault. Sorrel stared at the second line. Storehouse witness filed. Noma had not simply complained about missing bread. She had found where it went. The record opened. The eastern kitchen appeared beneath a ceiling blackened by coal smoke. Noma stood beside a ration scale, her hands gray with soot, counting grain sacks unloaded from the royal storehouse. Sorrel remembered her doing that after midnight, lips moving silently over numbers she had never been formally taught to read. The record showed a discrepancy. 20 servant portions left the storehouse. 14 reached the kitchen. The remaining 6 were marked delivered beneath names already removed from the birth ledger. Ration discrepancy entered. Noma followed the numbers. The fire shifted to a narrow counting room behind the lower ovens. There, sealed jars of grain and dried meat waited beneath the warden recovery mark. Calvin's clerks changed the labels before sending them back to palace merchants as surplus. Noma stood in the doorway. She saw them. Storehouse witness filed. Sorrel could almost smell the coal on the woman's dress as Noma carried her complaint to the ledger office. I counted the sacks, Noma said in the record. Dead servants are still receiving food, but no food reaches the kitchens. A clerk looked toward Calvin. The warden did not raise his voice. Then the kitchen has permitted an untrained coal carrier to misread crown inventory. She has the storehouse marks, the clerk said. Remove her standing before the marks enter witness law. Birth line removed. The scene changed. Noma stood where Sorrel stood now, wrists bound in white ledger cord. Tharion sat above the hall, with both wings folded. Calvin read that Noma Var had falsified ration counts to conceal theft. Sorrel watched the younger Dragon King lift his hand. White gold fire struck the page. Noma's name rose as ash. It crossed into Tharion's wing and disappeared beneath the seal. Surplus account fed. The grain she had tried to protect continued entering Calvin's recovery mark after her name was gone. Sorrel's voice came low. You erased the witness and kept the theft. Calvin looked at the floating record. The woman admitted unauthorized access to storehouse accounts. She counted food. She crossed administrative boundaries. She proved servants were starving while your office sold their rations twice. Calvin turned toward Tharion. Majesty, a coal carrier's arithmetic cannot overturn final inventory law. Tharion's gold eyes remained on the memory of his own fire. She had the storehouse marks, he said. Calvin's silence lasted only a fraction too long. Sorrel felt the second account settle into the wing. Tharion had accepted the accusation because the ledger named Noma a thief. He had not asked why the alleged thief arrived carrying proof against the office condemning her. The law had offered him a clean page. He had burned it clean. Sorrel looked at him. "You did not count the sacks." "No," he said. "You counted the accusation." His jaw tightened. "And my fire made it final." The admission sounded harsher this time. Not because it hurt less, because he had begun to understand the shape of his own obedience. Calvin pressed his seal against the ration page. Dead name inventory cannot reopen Crown supply law. The 4 lines began to darken. Noma's ridge flattened beneath the resin. Tharion's hand moved toward Sorrel's bleeding wrists. It stopped before reaching the cord. If he freed her now, Calvin would call the second account an act of attachment rather than ash law evidence. The restraint left her bound, but it no longer looked effortless. His fingers closed slowly at his side. Sorrel faced the wing. "Read before he converts hunger into miscount again." The silver fire cut through the seal. Noma Var appeared beneath Edris Pell. No body rose. Only the name, the storehouse marks, and the ration line Calvin had tried to turn into surplus. Noma Var had been erased after proving that food assigned to dead-name servants never reached the kitchens. Her witness standing was removed. Her ration evidence was called theft, and Tharion's fire burned her birthline while Calvin's recovery account continued profiting from the hunger she had tried to expose. The second buried decree had opened. Tovinsay's injured hands still waited beneath the final layer of black seal. The third ridge opened where the black seal was thickest, close to the lower joint of Tharion's wing. Unlike Edris Pell's sharp silver line, or Noma Var's ration-marked glow, this account appeared as 2 dark handprints pressed beneath the resin. Tovinsay. Sorrel remembered those hands. They had been broad, patient hands, always raw from lye and dragon fat. Tovin cleaned royal feast trays after midnight, scraping hardened grease from black metal, while nobles slept above kitchens warm enough to forget the servants feeding their fires. When both palms blistered beyond use, the overseer wrapped them in flour cloth and ordered him back to work. Days later, Tovin vanished. Now the shape of his burned hands pushed against the Dragon King's wing. Sorrel remained before the ledger, with the white cord around her wrists, its fibers stiff with dried blood. Her witness standing had opened, but her birth was still unrecognized. Tharion had not released her. Calvin still had enough law left to call freedom contamination. She lifted her chin toward the handprints. "Read Tovinsay's injury account." Calvin Mord moved closer to Tharion's wing. "Kitchen burn records cannot reopen royal seal law. The injury reached his wing. Heat residue reaches every royal surface, not in the shape of a servant's hands." Calvin's eyes sharpened. An Ashname witness does not possess authority over wing maintenance. Sorrel looked at the dark prints trapped beneath the seal. Then why did maintenance need him erased? Tharion's wing flexed. The black resin tightened over the prints. Pain crossed his face, but he kept the membrane extended. Edris Pell and Noma Var remained visible beneath Sorrel's name, 3 debts held open across the body of the king, whose fire had finalized each decree. "Open the injury line," Tharion said. Calvin bowed. "Majesty." The third account lies inside the seal compound itself. Reading it may damage the legal surface beyond repair. Tharion's gaze stayed on the handprints. "Then the surface was never clean," the ash answered. White gold fire moved through the black resin, outlining each finger beneath the seal. 4 records opened. Wing seal compound handled. Servant burns recorded. Maintenance source witnessed. Injury claimant erased. Sorrel stared at the third line. Maintenance source witnessed. Tovin had not been erased merely because his hands were injured. He had seen what burned them. The record opened inside the fire. The lower kitchen appeared after midnight. Tovin stood beside a stone rendering basin filled with melted dragon fat from royal feast trays. The substance was normally boiled into lamp fuel and furnace wax. But on that night, Calvin's clerks carried black ash jars into the room and emptied them into the basin. The molten fat darkened. Silver letters surfaced briefly across it. Fragments of names. Not complete enough to read. Not yet. A clerk poured grain oil from the Warden recovery stores into the mixture. Another added powdered ledger seal and coin filings taken from closed injury accounts. Ash name surplus. Dead rations. Withheld injury coin. All rendered together. Wing seal compound handled. Tovin entered carrying a tray of cleaning tools. He stopped when he saw the letters moving across the black liquid. "What names are those?" he asked. The clerks turned. One knocked the rendering hook from his hands. It fell into the basin. Burning seal compound splashed across Tovin's palms. Servant Burns recorded. Tovin screamed but did not run. He looked at the black liquid covering his hands, and the silver fragments beneath it became visible against his skin. He had touched the proof. Maintenance source witnessed. Sorrel watched him wrap his burned hands and carry an injury claim to the lower ledger office. The claim named the secret rendering basin, the Warden recovery ingredients, and the servant name fragments inside the seal compound. Calvin read the complaint. "You handled restricted crown material," he said. "I was ordered to clean the basin. You witnessed a maintenance right without standing. The names were moving inside it." Calvin looked at Tovin's bandaged hands. "Then the contamination has entered the claimant. Injury claimant erased." The record shifted to Cindervault Ledger Hall. Tovin stood bound before Tharion. Calvin described him as a servant who had stolen royal seal compound and burned himself attempting to damage the king's wings. Tovin tried to raise his wrapped hands. "The seal is made from what you take from erased servants," he said. The younger Tharion looked toward Calvin. "The compound has been tested under succession law," the warden replied. "The claimant seeks injury coin through sabotage." Tharion raised his hand. White gold fire fell. Tovin's name burned. His ash entered the wing seal he had tried to expose. Sorrel felt sick. "You erased him and mixed his name into the same seal that burned him." Calvin's face remained controlled. "Contaminated ash returns to the legal surface it threatened." He was not contamination. He handled sovereign material without authority. He was ordered into the room. "The debt account cannot prove assignment." Sorrel looked toward the ledger. "Because you erased the worker and kept the work." Tharion stared at the memory of his own fire striking Tovin's page. "The complaint named the recovery ingredients," he said. Calvin bowed. "The complaint came from an unauthorized servant, and I burned it without reading the basin record." Calvin did not answer. Tharion's gold eyes darkened. Again, the word was quiet. Sorrel heard what lived inside it. Edris, Noma, Tovin. 3 accusations made clean enough for a king who preferred final law to inconvenient witnesses. "You did not only carry their names," Sorrel told him. "Your wing was sealed with what was stolen from them." Tharion looked at her through the fire. "I know. No," she said. "Now you are beginning to." Calvin struck the maintenance page with his seal. The handprints began to disappear. Wing compound records are protected by succession law. They cannot be opened by an unrecognized birth line. Sorrel pulled against the cord. "Read before he turns burned hands into stolen material." Tharion spread his wing wider. The black seal split across both palm marks. Tovin Say appeared beneath Nomavar, his name framed by the shape of the hands Calvin's compound had burned. The third account revealed that Tovin had discovered the royal wing seal was rendered from dead rations, withheld injury coin, and ash name surplus. His hands were burned by the compound, his witness claim was recast as sabotage, and Tharion's fire erased him before his own ash was bound into the seal he tried to expose. All 3 missing kitchen names were now visible, and beneath them, the black seal began to crack across the full span of the Dragon King's wing. The first crack reached the wing bone, and Cindervault's polished law began to split with it. Black seal resin peeled from Tharion Mavrek's left wing in narrow strips, exposing silver ridges beneath the membrane. Edris Pell, Nomavar, Tovin Say. Their names remained below Sorrel's burning receipt, no longer hidden beneath the surface that had made royal darkness look natural. Calvin Mord stepped toward the royal dragon ledger. "Close the wing," he ordered. "Not to Sorrel, to the king." Tharion's gold eyes turned toward him. Calvin lowered his voice, but the entire hall heard it. A sovereign wing carrying unclosed servant debts cannot hold succession fire. If the seal breaks completely, your right to the throne becomes contestable. The nobles behind their dragon-bone masks shifted. There it was, the law behind the silence. Tharion had not merely worn the erased names because Calvin wanted them hidden. The wing seal had protected the appearance that the king's fire remained clean enough to rule. Sorrel stood bound before the ledger, her wrists raw beneath the white cord. So the names were covered to protect his crown. Calvin's gaze cut toward her. A person without recognized birth does not interpret succession law. Sorrel looked at the 3 names burning across Tharion's wing. The people you erased already interpreted it with their bodies. Calvin struck the ledger clasp. The royal dragon ledger slammed shut. White gold fire vanished from the air. The 3 servant names dimmed. Sorrel's own receipt flickered across the wing as black resin began dragging itself over the letters again. Tharion staggered. Only once. The seal was closing from inside his flesh. Calvin raised both gloved hands. The court will recognize the visible marks as wing fire contamination caused by forbidden restoration. The servant's speech will remain inadmissible. The kitchen accounts will return to administrative closure. Sorrel pulled against the cord. Pain opened her wrists again. The ash around the ledger did not rise. The page was closed. The fire-bearer remained open. She looked at Tharion. Your wing is still the record. His face was tight with pain. What does it require? Not more fire. Calvin moved between them. Do not answer her. Sorrel kept her eyes on the king. It requires the fire-bearer to refuse the seal. Tharion's black wings shook. The polished resin continued creeping over Edris's name. Noma's first letter disappeared. Tovin's handprints flattened beneath darkness. Calvin's voice became urgent. Majesty, refusal will break succession protection. The court may remove you before sunset. Tharion looked toward the throne. For one breath, Sorrel saw the ruler. He had always been the man who trusted final decrees, because clean law spared him from examining what obedience cost. His throne stood behind him in black stone, untouched by kitchen smoke, ration hunger, burned hands, or blank birth lines. Then he looked at Sorrel's bound wrists. The fire had been his. The decrees had been his. The wing had carried what his law erased. Tharion spread both wings to their full span. I refused the seal. The black resin tore. The sound was not a roar. It was 1,000 dry pages ripping at once. Silver lines opened across both wings, not releasing spirits or raising bodies, but exposing account after account beneath the royal membrane. Names did not rise all at once. They became legible in rows, each one attached to a debt. Labor taken, ration diverted, injury denied, testimony burned. The royal dragon ledger burst open. Calvin lunged for the central page. Sorrel stepped into his path despite the cord. He struck her across the face with one gloved hand. Tharion moved. This time he did not stop. The record was already open. He caught Calvin's wrist before the warden could touch Sorrel again. White gold fire ran over the black glove. The ash name seal beneath it appeared. Not confession. Receipt. Calvin's private authority had signed every transfer from erased servant accounts into wing seal maintenance. Tharion forced the gloved hand against the ledger. Read the warden's seal. The pages answered. Witness erasures authorized. Recovery accounts concealed. Wing debt suppressed. Royal decrees misrepresented. Calvin's face emptied. Majesty. The law required. My law permitted, Tharion said. You administered. I burned. He did not place the entire crime on the man in his grip. That mattered. He looked toward the court. High Ledger. Warden Calvin Mord is stripped of ash, name authority, recovery custody, and access to royal fire. He will stand trial under every account bearing his seal. The guards hesitated. Tharion opened his damaged wings farther, displaying the names his throne had hidden. Take him. They obeyed. Only after Calvin was removed did Tharion turn toward Sorrel. He reached for the white cord. This time, no account remained closed enough to call the act contamination. He burned the binding away without touching her skin. Sorrel's hands fell free. The ledger opened to her blank birth line. Tharion did not write the name himself. He placed the pen beside her. Sorrel understood the choice. Restoration given by a king could be withdrawn by another king. A witness name written by the person who carried it stood differently under the law they were about to rebuild. She wrote slowly, Sorrel Narth. The ash received it. The ledger did not burn. Tharion faced the servants along the pillars. Ash name law is suspended. Every erased labor, ration, injury, burial, and witness account will be reopened. No royal fire will finalize an erasure without a living witness outside the warden's office. He looked at Sorrel. Will you serve as that witness? She held his gaze. I will not serve as silence with a better title. Something almost human moved through his expression. Then stand as correction. The court did not kneel to her. It did something harder. It made room. Later, when the hall had emptied and the names still glowed across Tharion's wounded wings, he stood beside Sorrel at the open ledger. I cannot ask you to forgive the fire, he said. No, I can make sure it never burns alone again. Sorrel looked at the names written across his wings. Not love marks, not destiny. Debts he had chosen to keep visible. She placed her hand beside his on the ledger, close enough to feel the heat but not surrender to it. Then begin with every name. Tharion bowed his head, and together they opened the next account.